It was always on a Friday, not because of any religious meaning or cosmic alignment, just routine, predictable, comfortable. For Jeffrey Dahmer, Friday nights weren't about rest or relaxation. They were about meat, fresh, human meat. While the rest of the world watched sitcoms or ordered pizza, he was dragging lifeless bodies across the floor, preparing dinner. Neighbors smelled it through the vents. A strange odor, burnt, sour, metallic. They complained, again and again. The building manager shrugged. "Jeff just likes to cook late," he said. No one imagined that behind apartment 213's locked door, torsos were being seasoned, organs were bagged and frozen, skulls were cleaned and arranged on shelves like souvenirs. Jeffrey had a system, a ritual. Bring a man home, drug him, photograph him, kill him, pose him, dissect him, save the parts that felt meaningful. Sometimes a heart, sometimes a bicep, sometimes a head. He stored them in his refrigerator beside mustard and soda cans, and when the craving hit, he cooked. Low heat, slow roast. He didn't eat out of hunger. He ate to feel close, to keep a piece of them with him, inside him. Because the only thing scarier than being alone was being forgotten, and Dahmer would do anything to make them stay, even if it meant consuming their silence. This wasn't a horror movie. This was Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1991. Real bodies, real screams. Real nightmares served on plates. And in this story, there are no metaphors, just bone, blood, and appetite. You're about to enter a kitchen built in hell, where love, lust, and death were all part of the recipe, before Netflix. Before the documentaries, before the world called him a monster, Jeffrey Dahmer was just a quiet man in a quiet apartment, living in a neighborhood that had stopped paying attention. He smiled at neighbors. He held open doors. He listened more than he spoke. And no one knew that behind his pale eyes was a hunger unlike anything they'd ever imagined. This isn't just the story of a killer, it's the story of a man who crossed every line: murder, mutilation, necrophilia, cannibalism, and still managed to disappear into the crowd. How does someone so disturbed live undetected for over a decade? How does he lure, kill, and consume 17 young men, and no one stops him? In this video, we're going beyond the headlines and into the rotting heart of apartment 213. We'll break down Dahmer's methods, his rituals, and his chilling Friday night routines. From drugging victims to boiling their remains on the stove, every detail reveals something darker. Not just a killer, but a man obsessed with possession, control, and never being left alone. This isn't easy to hear. It shouldn't be. But if you've come looking for the truth, not the Hollywood version, not the dramatized version, then stay. Watch carefully, because sometimes the worst monsters are the ones who say nothing at all. Before we start, do one thing. Subscribe to this channel if you want more true crime stories told without filters. Like this video to support the work. And comment below with what country and city you're watching from. Let's see how far the echoes of Dahmer's horror have traveled. Are you ready? Then step inside. This is where the silence began. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Dissected Silence. He was blonde, soft-spoken, and always staring at something that wasn't there. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't born with blood on his hands. He was born in a hospital room like any other child, crying, squirming, innocent. But somewhere along the line, something changed. Something broke. Or worse, something never developed at all. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, were trapped in a toxic marriage. Screaming matches, slamming doors, nights filled with cold silence and days with distant glances. There was no warmth, no softness, no place for a child to feel safe. Dahmer learned early that love could disappear, that people could vanish, and when they did, no one came back. He started small: bones, roadkill, dead squirrels. He'd collect the bodies in the woods behind his house and dissect them with surgical focus. Not out of fear, not out of disgust, but curiosity, obsession. The inside of a body fascinated him, the way it held together, the way it fell apart. By the age of 10, he was storing bones in jars, bleaching skulls, and burying remains in the backyard. His father, a chemist, once showed him how to clean animal bones for preservation. It was meant to be a science lesson. But for Jeffrey, it became the blueprint for something else entirely. In school, he was invisible, awkward, distant. He didn't talk unless spoken to, laughed at strange moments, avoided eye contact. Classmates called him a weirdo. Teachers said he had potential, but no motivation. No one noticed that he was already slipping into another world, one made of silence, shadows, and bone. Puberty didn't bring connection. It brought confusion. Jeffrey discovered he was gay, but felt ashamed. Isolated, terrified. He couldn't tell his parents, couldn't tell friends, so he buried the feelings deep, alongside the bones. And slowly, those desires began to fuse with something darker, the fantasy of controlling, keeping, and never being left again. By 14, he was imagining male figures unconscious beneath him, not moving, not rejecting, just staying. He wanted companionship, but not conversation, affection, but not emotion. What he craved most was ownership, to possess someone entirely. And in those fantasies, the line between love and death dissolved. He began drinking in high school, heavily. Whiskey in the morning, beer at lunch, vodka in class. He didn't hide it, he didn't care, and no one stopped him. Not teachers, not counselors, not even his parents. As long as he didn't cause trouble, he was ignored. The silence grew louder, and so did the fantasies. Jeffrey didn't want to hurt people, not yet. He wanted them still, silent, present, not alive, not dead, just his. And with every year that passed, the urge became harder to ignore. The animal corpses were no longer enough. He was 18 when he killed for the first time, a hitchhiker, a moment of impulse, a sudden storm inside his chest. But even before that, the path had already been set, because the monster the world would fear had been building in the dark for years. And no one saw it. Or worse, they saw it and looked away. Chapter 2. The first time he didn't let go. It was June 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer had just graduated high school. His parents were gone. His mother had moved out with his little brother, and his father was staying elsewhere. The house was empty, and so was he. He drank more than ever, pacing rooms like a ghost. That day he saw a young man hitchhiking on the side of the road, blonde, thin, shirtless. His name was Stephen Hicks. Dahmer slowed the car and asked if he wanted a ride. Stephen said he was headed to a rock concert. Jeffrey smiled. "Come hang out for a bit first," he offered. Beers, music, just some harmless fun. Stephen hesitated, then got in. It was only supposed to be a few hours, but in Dahmer's mind, he was already trying to find a way to make it last forever. They drank in the living room, listened to music, talked. For a moment it felt almost normal. Jeffrey didn't want to kill him, not yet. He just didn't want him to leave. But when Stephen stood up and said, "I should go now," something snapped. The panic. The fear of being left again. The fantasy colliding with reality. He couldn't let it happen, not again. He grabbed a dumbbell, walked up behind him, and swung. The metal crushed Stephen's skull. He collapsed, bleeding onto the carpet. Jeffrey stared, the sound still ringing in his ears. He straddled the body and strangled him just to be sure. It was the first time he saw a human life extinguish in his hands. And he didn't feel fear. He felt calm. He stood there, listening to the silence. It was the kind of silence he craved. No rejection, no escape, no goodbyes, just stillness. That night he stripped the body, touched it, explored it, and then, without shaking, without crying, he began the ritual of disposal. In the basement he dissected Stephen's body with a hunting knife, cut off the limbs, separated organs, buried the pieces in shallow graves behind the house. Some bones he smashed with a sledgehammer. Others he kept, for reasons he didn't yet understand. It wasn't about hiding the crime. It was about keeping a peace. For weeks, he returned to the site, dug up the bones, touched them, cleaned them. It wasn't just morbid curiosity, it was obsession. Stephen was gone, but in a way, not really. He was part of Dahmer now, a presence he could control, revisit, reclaim. No one suspected. His father returned home weeks later, unaware that a body had been buried, dismembered, and scattered across the yard. There were no screams. No missing posters. Stephen Hicks was just another young man who vanished, another name added to the wind. Jeffrey tried to move on. He enrolled in college, tried the army, tried jobs, tried to be normal. But the silence inside him never faded. In fact, it grew louder. The memory of Stephen wasn't a scar, it was a blueprint, a moment of clarity that whispered, "You know what to do next." It would be 9 years before he killed again, but the monster wasn't asleep, just quiet, patient, waiting. Because once he crossed that line from loneliness to murder, there was no going back, only forward, only deeper, and the next time he wouldn't bury the body, he'd preserve it. Chapter 3. Where the silence turned to hunger. 9 years passed. 9 years of pretending, jobs, apartments, failed relationships, arrests. He drifted through life like a ghost, always out of place, always empty. But the memories of Stephen Hicks never left. They grew sharper, louder, more detailed. Not like a trauma. Like a craving, a desire he couldn't name. Until one night in September 1987, everything snapped again. He met Stephen Tuomi in a bar. Dahmer wasn't hunting, not yet. He just wanted company, someone to hold on to, someone to not leave. They drank, talked, went back to a hotel room together. Dahmer didn't bring weapons, no plan. But the next morning, Tuomi was dead. His chest caved in, blood dried on the sheets, and Dahmer had no memory of killing him. Panic? No. He bought a suitcase, stuffed the body inside, took it to his grandmother's house where he was staying. He didn't bury it this time. He waited until night, then opened the case and began cutting. He cleaned the bones with bleach, flushed the organs, crushed the skull with a hammer. It was methodical, cold, familiar, and it felt good, not joyful, not euphoric, but satisfying, controlled. He didn't lose anything this time. He kept what mattered, the stillness, the silence, and with it came something new, power. The power to erase a life, shape it, preserve it, own it. That murder opened a door he would never close again. In the years that followed, he killed frequently. Always young men, always strangers, always with the same twisted script: lure, drug, kill, photograph, dissect. But with each victim, he refined the process, started preserving bodies longer, kept skulls, stored hearts. He began boiling heads to strip off the flesh, kept bones in boxes, stored torsos in blue barrels filled with acid. And most disturbing of all, he began to eat parts. At first, small, a bicep, a liver, cooked slowly in a pan, salted, consumed in silence. He said it wasn't about taste. It was about closeness, keeping them inside him forever. A desperate ritual to stop the emptiness from growing. As if devouring flesh could make loneliness go away. As if swallowing a heart could replace love. His apartment became a museum of horror. Skulls on shelves, freezers full of limbs, a human altar under construction. Neighbors complained about the smell again, but he blamed spoiled meat, dirty dishes. The landlord accepted it because monsters don't always scream. Sometimes they speak gently. He kept Polaroids, dozens, posed victims like dolls, photographed every stage, alive, unconscious, dead, dissected. These weren't trophies, they were memories, moments of control captured forever. And if a body decayed too fast, he'd flip through the photos, reliving what he lost. By the early 1990s, Dahmer was no longer human, not inside. He had become something else entirely. A man who ate hearts, dissolved torsos, kissed skulls. And no one stopped him. Not the cops, not the neighbors, not the system, because no one could see the hunger behind his smile. No one believed that a man so quiet could be feeding on silence. Chapter 4. The warnings. They ignored. The smell was unbearable. Rotting meat, chemicals, something unnatural. Neighbors on 25th Street in Milwaukee called the landlord, called the police, called the health department. They said it smelled like death. Dahmer told them it was spoiled food, a freezer that broke. And they believed him, because monsters don't live in apartments, not with neat shirts and quiet smiles. Glenda Cleveland, a neighbor in the adjacent building, knew something was wrong. She heard screams, saw young men running from Dahmer's apartment. One night she saw a boy, naked, bleeding, stumbling down the alley. She called 911, begged for help. Officers came. They found the boy, 14 years old, dazed, drugged, unable to speak. But Jeffrey was calm. He told the police the boy was his boyfriend, said he'd just had too much to drink. The cops laughed. They joked about gay stuff on the radio. Then they walked the boy back inside the apartment, into the monster's arms. Minutes later, he was dead. His name was Conorak Synthesomphone. Dahmer kept Conorak's skull, took pictures of the corpse, filed a police report for a disturbance, and the case was closed. No further questions, no investigation, no warrant. They walked past a body in the next room, past the acid barrel, past the freezer full of flesh, and left. He was almost caught again when a man escaped. Tracy Edwards, one of Dahmer's last victims. He ran from the apartment with handcuffs still on his wrist, flagged down a police car. This time, the officers took him seriously. They went back to the apartment with Edwards. They knocked. Dahmer opened the door. The officers stepped inside. The smell hit first. Then the Polaroids. Dozens of them, bodies in various stages of decay. One photo showed a head, still attached to a spinal cord. They opened the fridge. Inside, a severed human head. Cold, clean, waiting to be eaten. Dahmer didn't resist. He knew it was over. Quiet as ever, he said, "For what I did, I should be dead." But what he had done couldn't be undone. 17 lives lost, some never identified, some never buried, some never missed. Until the freezer door opened, the news exploded. Reporters camped outside. The public was horrified. But what haunted everyone more than the crimes themselves were the failures, the missed warnings, the ignored cries. The boy handed back to his killer, the neighbors unheard, the system that saw everything and did nothing. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't hiding. He used his real name, paid rent, answered the door, but because he was polite, white and quiet, no one looked deeper. The police returned the boy. The landlord ignored the blood. The world looked away again and again, until the horror overflowed. And by then, the walls of apartment 213 weren't just soaked in blood. They were soaked in silence. A silence built by every person who didn't ask, didn't listen, didn't care. Because the real horror wasn't just Dahmer. It was how long we let him feed. IE Chapter 5. The Trial of the Walking Void. The courtroom was packed. Victims' families on one side, journalists, lawyers, cops on the other, everyone waiting to hear the voice of a man who had eaten human flesh, boiled skulls, and slept beside corpses. They expected screaming, madness, a monster in chains. But when Jeffrey Dahmer walked in, he looked like a math teacher. Glasses, slouched shoulders, calm. He didn't deny anything. He confessed to all 17 murders, gave details, timelines. Locations. He described how he lured his victims, drugged them, killed them, posed them, how he kept body parts, ate some, destroyed others, and he said it all like a man reading a recipe. No remorse, no trembling, just facts. The courtroom sat in silence as he described cutting open torsos, boiling heads, photographing lifeless eyes. "I wanted them to stay," he said. "I wanted to keep them with me in any way I could." He admitted that killing was never enough. He wanted complete possession. Flesh, memory, soul. Psychiatrists were called. Some said he was legally insane, that no sane man could do what he did. Others argued he knew exactly what he was doing, that his planning, concealment, and manipulation showed control, not madness. The debate, evil or illness. Dahmer sat through it all without emotion. The only time he cried was when his father testified. Lionel Dahmer begged the court to believe his son was sick, not evil, that he had tried to be a good parent. That he didn't know, that he couldn't have known. Then came the families. One after another they stood and screamed, mothers, brothers, sons. Some wept, some shouted. One woman looked him in the eye and said, "I hate you. I hope you burn in hell." Dahmer never looked up. never flinched, as if he wasn't even there. On February 15th, 1992, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. 15 life sentences, over 900 years behind bars, no parole, no escape. The courtroom applauded. But Dahmer, he nodded once, as if he already knew, as if the sentence was just another step in the ritual. Reporters swarmed the exit. Everyone wanted to know one thing: why? Why had he done it? What was broken inside him? What could turn a man into a butcher of boys? In a later interview, he said, "I should have stayed with God. I was so far removed from reality, so far from normal. I was sick." But his version of sickness wasn't filled with remorse. It was filled with vacancy. He didn't cry for the dead. He cried because he got caught, because the silence had been broken, because he'd lost control. His only regret? That I let myself become this, that I let it get so far. The trial ended. The world moved on. But the image of Dahmer, smiling softly, hands folded, calmly discussing cannibalism, never left the public's mind. Because the real horror of his story wasn't the crime, it was the calmness, the ordinary. The idea that a man could do all of that and still be so quiet. Chapter 6. The day the monster was silenced. Prison didn't scare Jeffrey Dahmer. He welcomed it. After the trial, he told reporters, "I deserve death." But since Wisconsin had no death penalty, he would live out his sentence inside Columbia Correctional Institution, isolated at first, for his own protection. But eventually he was moved to general population. Among murderers, rapists, and broken men, he finally blended in. He worked in the library, cleaned toilets, mopped hallways. Inmates called him Dahmer, never Jeff, never brother, just the name that haunted newspapers. Some feared him, others wanted to hurt him, but most watched him in silence, waiting to see what a real-life cannibal would do next. What he did shocked everyone. He joked about his crimes, about the smell, about eating people. He would mold mashed potatoes into body parts during lunch, use ketchup to mimic blood. He laughed. Other inmates didn't, and the guards, they let it slide. As long as there was no fight, they didn't care. Dahmer also began reading the Bible, a lot, claimed to find God, asked to be baptized. Some believed him, others said it was a performance, another mask, a way to escape judgment through religion. But whether real or not, it changed little inside the prison. The other inmates still saw a man who had eaten the dead. One of them was Christopher Scarver, convicted of murder, paranoid, violent. Deeply religious, Scarver believed he was chosen by God to punish the wicked, and to him, Dahmer wasn't just wicked. He was an insult to life, a man who mocked death, who wore his sins like trophies. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was assigned to clean the prison gym bathroom with two other inmates, Scarver and Jesse Anderson. There were no guards nearby, no cameras, just concrete, bleach, and silence. It was the moment Scarver had been waiting for. He grabbed a metal bar from the weight room, walked behind Dahmer and swung. Once, twice, 3 times. Skull shattered, teeth cracked. Dahmer hit the floor, bleeding, gasping, not speaking. Scarver didn't stop. He beat Anderson too. Then calmly walked back to his cell, still holding the bar. "God told me to do it," he said. Dahmer died an hour later in the hospital. No last words, no dramatic ending, just blood on the gym floor. His brain was preserved for study, but later, at his father's request, it was destroyed. There would be no further analysis, no final answers, only silence. News of his death spread fast. Some mourned, many celebrated. Victims' families said justice had finally arrived, but others were left disturbed, not by his death, but by how ordinary it was. No fire, no monsters, just one inmate killing another, as if all that horror had ended with a mop bucket. And yet, the terror lives on. Not in Dahmer's body, but in his story, in the cold facts, in the photos, in the unanswered questions, because Jeffrey Dahmer didn't die screaming. He died the way he lived, quiet, alone, and holding on to a darkness no one fully understood. Chapter 7. The Cannibal and the Curtain Call. He died in 1994, but he never really went away. If anything, Jeffrey Dahmer became more famous after death than he ever was alive. News specials, documentaries, biographies, podcasts, movies, Halloween costumes. T-shirts. People wanted to know more, see more, feel more. The horror had turned into entertainment. At first, it was clinical. Journalists and psychologists dissecting his life, his trauma, his methods, trying to answer the question everyone feared. Could this happen again? But slowly, the tone shifted. From curiosity to fascination. From fear to obsession. Books like The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer sold thousands of copies. Letters poured into prisons from fans, some offering marriage. Others sending money. One woman tattooed his face on her thigh. In online forums, people debated his sad eyes, his tragic childhood. Some even called him beautiful. The cannibal had become a cult figure. And then came Hollywood. Films like My Friend Dahmer and Dahmer, Monster. The Jeffrey Dahmer story turned his crimes into stories. Actors played him. Music swelled behind his silence. Scenes were stylized. Victims were framed like poetry. Millions watched, and many sympathized. Families of the victims were horrified. They said the shows rewrote history, humanized the monster, ignored the real pain. "They made my brother a prop," said one woman, "and his killer the star." But the ratings soared, because people don't look away from darkness. They binge it. Why do we do this? Why do serial killers become celebrities? Why do monsters get documentaries, while victims vanish into names and numbers? Maybe it's control. Maybe we believe that if we understand the evil, we can outrun it, or maybe we're drawn to it. Psychologists call it morbid curiosity, the brain's survival mechanism trying to process danger. But there's another layer: voyeurism. Watching horror safely, seeing death without touching it, feeling fear while still eating popcorn. Jeffrey Dahmer gave people that feeling, and they couldn't get enough. There's also the illusion of complexity. Dahmer wasn't loud, he wasn't angry, he read the Bible. He listened more than he spoke. He seemed normal, people say, and that scares them, because if evil can look like him, it can look like anyone, even you, even me. So we try to explain it, wrap it in trauma, science, psychology. But maybe the scariest truth is this: some people do unspeakable things, not because they're broken, but because they can. And we, unable to look away, give them immortality. Jeffrey Dahmer is gone, but his story breathes. In interviews, in memes, in reenactments. In every viewer who finishes a true crime episode and says, "He was sick but fascinating. The monster died, but we gave him a spotlight." And monsters love the dark until someone hands them a stage. Chapter 8. Reflections of the Same Monster. Jeffrey Dahmer dismembered bodies in his kitchen, but he wasn't the first to kill with a smile. Ted Bundy used charm instead of chemicals, lured women to his car with fake casts, soft eyes, and a quiet voice. Once they were close, the mask dropped. He bludgeoned, strangled, drove with corpses in his car, slept beside them. Like Dahmer, he didn't want victims, he wanted possessions. Bundy confessed to over 30 murders, but the number may be higher. He buried some bodies, returned to others, combed their hair, painted their nails. Possession, he said, is the ultimate expression of love. Dahmer said almost the same thing. I wanted to keep them with me forever. 2 men, 2 states, 2 decades, 1 obsession, control after death. Then there was John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, a respected businessman, community volunteer. He murdered 33 young men and boys, lured them to his home, handcuffed them under the guise of a magic trick, then strangled them. Most were buried under his house. Neighbors smelled something. Again, no one looked deeper. Sound familiar? Like Dahmer, Gacy separated his identities. He was Pogo the Clown at charity events and a sadistic killer by night. He smiled in court. Mocked victims' families, said he was innocent until the evidence buried in his crawl space proved otherwise. Dahmer kept skulls in the fridge. Gacy stacked bodies beneath his feet. Dennis Nilsen in London mirrored Dahmer almost perfectly. He invited young men to his apartment, killed them in the bathtub, sat beside their corpses for days, dressed them, spoke to them, slept next to them. He cooked parts, flushed others. When arrested, he said, "I couldn't bear to let them go." Oh, sound like Milwaukee? Nilsen and Dahmer never met, never spoke, but their minds built the same prison, a house filled with the dead, all pretending to still be alive. Both men feared abandonment more than punishment. Both believed silence could be preserved in flesh. The patterns don't stop at methods. They extend to childhoods, absent fathers, unstable mothers, isolation, shame, confusion about sexuality, early signs ignored, warning lights covered. Society always sees the blood, but never the bruise that came first. Even their mannerisms match, soft-spoken, polite, intelligent. Bundy studied law. Dahmer read science. Nilsen wrote journals. Gacy shook hands with politicians. None of them looked like monsters. That was the point. Monsters who look like monsters get caught. Monsters who look like men get away. And what they all craved wasn't just death. It was domination beyond death. Killing wasn't the climax. It was the setup. What came after, the posing bodies, preserving parts, revisiting corpses, that was the true ritual. The part that made them feel something. The part that made them feel human. So maybe we should stop asking how different they were. Maybe the better question is, how many more are like them right now? Not with the same name, but with the same eyes, the same hunger, the same silence building behind the smile. Because if history repeats itself, then somewhere another monster is already rehearsing his mask. Chapter 9. Built by silence, fed by neglect. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't born with a knife in his hand. Ted Bundy didn't crawl out of the womb with rope and a crowbar. John Wayne Gacy didn't start life with bodies in his basement. They were built, slowly, quietly, and not just by trauma, but by a world that saw them and still looked away. Dahmer grew up in a house full of shouting and silence. His mother's breakdowns, his father's absence, nights where no one asked how he felt, days where no one noticed the dead animals in the backyard. A boy obsessed with corpses isn't invisible by accident. He's ignored into invisibility. He told adults he had dark thoughts, that he fantasized about bodies. They nodded, changed the subject. Bundy spoke of violent dreams. Gacy was abused by his father and molested by neighbors. Nilsen drowned in shame and isolation. The red flags were neon. But no one wanted to deal with them. Why? Because facing the darkness early takes work. It's uncomfortable, it's expensive. It's easier to say, he's just a weird kid, and hope he grows out of it. It's easier to punish than to understand. Easier to blame than to intervene, until blood hits the headlines. In schools, strange kids are bullied instead of supported. In homes, silence replaces safety. In churches, shame is weaponized. In courts, trauma is dismissed. And in all of this, potential monsters are watching, learning, hardening. They don't just wake up one day and decide to kill. They erode like metal soaked in acid. And the irony? Some tried to ask for help. Dahmer did. Nilsen did. Even Bundy hinted at it. But when they reached out, the hand they grabbed let go, so they stopped reaching and started acting. Acting on fantasies that could have been treated, prevented, redirected. But instead, they were fed. And once it begins, once they taste control, silence, flesh, it's too late. We send in the police, the psychiatrists, the media. We dissect the crimes, build documentaries, sell books. But the damage was done long before the first body dropped. The crime began when the world didn't care. Every serial killer was once a child, a student, a neighbor, a son, a soul at the edge of the cliff. And someone, a parent, a teacher, a friend, had the chance to pull them back. But they didn't. Or couldn't, or wouldn't, and the cliff swallowed them. So maybe the monsters aren't born in shadows. Maybe we raise them in daylight, with every insult ignored, every cry unheard, every early warning dismissed. Because in the end, the silence that surrounds a killer is louder than the screams of any victim, and that silence belongs to all of us. Chapter 10. The ones still hiding. Jeffrey Dahmer is dead. His apartment was destroyed. His remains were buried. But his pattern didn't die with him. The steps he took, the way he thought, the methods he perfected, they live on in archives, in psychology books, in FBI databases, and maybe in someone else's mind right now. Statistically, the FBI believes there are 25 to 50 active serial killers in the United States at any given time. Most aren't famous. Most don't get caught. They pick the right victims. Homeless, forgotten, invisible. They don't leave bodies in freezers. They leave no bodies at all. They've learned. We expect monsters to roar, to leave trails of blood, but the most dangerous ones learn from those before them. They study Dahmer, Bundy, Gacy. They refine the silence, change the tools, evolve. They kill with precision, with patience, with understanding of how we think, how we fail. Some of them are still rehearsing, testing boundaries, hurting animals, isolating, watching violent fantasies loop in their minds, planning, waiting for the moment when fantasy tips into reality. The way it did for Dahmer, the way it did for so many others before him. And here's the truth, you've probably walked past one, at the store, on the train, at school, maybe even shook hands, because the scariest part isn't that monsters exist. It's that they blend in, The real horror is not their teeth, it's their disguise. They are good at it. That's why they succeed, why they go undetected. Because they've learned what works. Be quiet, be polite, stay invisible. And the world rewards that, until it's too late. And while we watch documentaries and listen to true crime podcasts, we forget something. Someone out there is learning from it too. Someone watching, taking notes, perfecting the next chapter in this endless bleeding script. The names change, the cities change, but the pattern remains. A broken home, a quiet child, a missed warning, a dead body, then another, and another. Until someone finally asks, how didn't we see it? But by then, someone's already missing, so if we want to stop the next Dahmer, the next Bundy, the next forgotten monster, we need to stop looking for monsters and start listening for silence. Because silence is where they hide, and silence is where they grow. And if you think this is just a story, ask yourself, when was the last time you really looked someone in the eyes and saw what they were hiding? Jeffrey Dahmer is gone. The doors to apartment 213 are sealed forever. The bodies are buried, the photos are locked away, but his story doesn't stay in the past. It whispers through headlines, echoes in podcasts, smiles through actors' faces, and in the quiet moments, it waits. Because the real horror isn't what Dahmer did, it's how long he did it, how many times he was seen and still overlooked. The monster didn't live in a forest, he lived in a neighborhood, ate fast food, paid rent, shook hands. And behind that calm voice was a scream that no one ever heard. So before you close this video, ask yourself, how many others are walking beside us right now? How many faces hide that same hunger? And most terrifying of all, would you even recognize one if they looked you in the eyes?